Welcome to week 2 of Neighboring. As we dive into this week, God keeps reminding us that it's really all about loving your neighbor as you love yourself. But it all starts with loving God. And as I began to look at my own life, God exposed some areas that I just really wasn't that good at. For example, I like to work out, so I'm going to the gym 5 or 6 days a week. And I go in and I'm in a rush, because you got to get to the office, so you work out, you have some little short conversations, and then you're out the door and headed off to the office so you can do ministry. And as I was leaving one day, and somebody was trying to talk to me, but I was in a hurry, God just reminded me that, Greg, you're walking by ministry in order to go to ministry. That there's opportunities right here that I'm trying to show you so you can love your neighbor, because your neighbor is across the street, but neighbors are everywhere where you are. And so it really showed me that that's exactly what Jesus was about. As I look in the scriptures, is that he had this ability to be wherever he was and be present. As a matter of fact, it says in John 1:14, it says, "And the Word became flesh, and he dwelt among us." And when it says that Jesus dwelt, it really means that he hung out, that he was connected, that he was present. And as I begin to look at his life, I saw all through his life that this was what he modeled. It was real to him, that people were real, that people mattered, and it was whoever was in front of him. When you look at the disciples, he had this relationship with them, and they really did life together. They dwelled together. And as he was going through his life doing ministry, he was with Martha and Mary, and he was just sitting down having a conversation. So all the busyness that was going on, but he was still there. And I'm reminded of a story in the Bible, several stories, but one story in particular where Jesus was walking on the road, and he was out doing ministry, and people were getting healed, and there's just huge crowds around him. And this lady comes up from behind him, and she really believes if she just touches the hem of his garment that her blood flow issue would be healed. And as she touched his garment, Jesus stops and asks the disciples, "Who touched me?" And they're like looking at him like he's crazy, because there's like thousands of people around him. And in that moment, he stops and he looks back to the lady. He didn't have to stop. And I asked myself, why did he stop? I really believe that he stopped for her so that she would know that she mattered. And even though all this was going on, that she was important. And that's really what loving your neighbor is slowing down enough to see what God is doing and see their needs and to step into their life. And it was a life lesson for the disciples because they were busy about where they were going, but Jesus was busy about where he was. And so what God has been teaching me through this neighboring journey is that I just have to slow down and realize that wherever I am is where God wants me to be in that moment, and not be so busy about trying to get somewhere and trying to be somewhere to do ministry when really my ministry is just simply to let his love flow through me. And that's really life-changing. It's liberating because now you get to do what God wants you to do, but you just relax and trust him to do it. And so what's your experience been in this whole journey?
I love when you talk about how Jesus modeled this. Even in today's group discussion, there's a story about Jesus being a neighbor to a Pharisee who is not the easiest person to be a neighbor to. And Jesus did this. He was present when it was comfortable, but he was present when it was not comfortable as well. And sometimes it's easy to be a neighbor to the people you get along with.
Right.
A couple years ago, we were living in Texas, and we had a next door neighbor that we got along with great. We loved them. They were amazing. We loved their family. Then I had a neighbor who lived behind me who he and I may have gotten in a small feud over the usage of a public dumpster. And again, at the time, if you asked me, am I being a good neighbor? Yes, and I would point to this guy.
Right.
But I would completely ignore the one who I wasn't being present with, who I wasn't taking the opportunity to love and be a good neighbor to. And so when looking at Jesus and looking at this, I think it's challenging to us, but also encouraging as we look at his model and how he really did love people and was fully present when it was easy, when it was difficult, in that moment.
Yes.
And as we're looking at our block maps, which you should all have by now, and you're starting to fill these out, we want you to look at opportunities to be present with the people around you. So number one, we're hoping that you're getting those names. You're putting those names and you're plugging them in, and that we're hoping you're having those conversations. You're taking those moments to be present, and that you're hopefully finding out hopes and dreams and hurts and prayer needs as we're going along in this.
You know, as I did this was it was eye-opening and convicting at the same time, because what was your experience?
I had one name. There was when I got mine, I had one name of someone I knew in my neighborhood.
Yeah, and you know, here's the thing is people are listening to this and they're going through this journey. I mean, here are two pastors. I mean, you know, we're not exactly the role model here, but I think in a lot of ways we are, because we all get busy and we miss out on what God's doing around us. And so as we do our map, it's not a map to say, you know, you're such a terrible neighbor. It's a map to say, man, you got opportunities. And as you get to know your neighbors, though, and as Joel's talking about this, there's some ways that you don't fill in your map. You know, you don't want to go to their mailbox and start looking through. And, oh, that's what their name is, you know, or go up and ring on their doorbell. Hey, you know, the pastor's got this project for me.
What's your name?
Yeah, exactly. So let God open the doors. Just allow it to be natural, because when it does that and it happens that way, I really believe we're being more like Jesus, who just, when the opportunities were there, he took advantage of them. And so that's all we're simply saying is relax, wait on God, and he'll open the doors, and you'll begin to know your neighbors. In 2 months, 3 months, a year, you're going to be surprised at how God has used you because you decided to be present.
My experience with neighboring actually began when I moved into the house that I have now. I had been praying with my small group at church that we really wanted to move to an area that actually had homes where we could meet people. And then we started the neighboring series right around the time that we moved into our new home. But I didn't know how to go about meeting my neighbors, what was normal, what was accepted. And through the book that we were reading and going through a small group, we talked about praying and just asking God to open up those opportunities for us. So I began to pray, and when I started to pray, my dog ran away. And when the dog ran away, we weren't home and didn't know it, and our neighbor came up to let us know that our dog had ran away and there was a hole in the fence. And so my first instinct was, oh, this is important. This is on purpose. What's your name? So for me, that was like an awesome moment of just praying and seeing God do something. But when we were in group together, Lindy actually shared something with me that really touched me about how important it is just to be intentional in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, I'm total opposite. She just moved into a neighborhood. I've been in one for 12 years. And during this study, God just really convicted me, because here I am in a neighborhood for 12 years and barely know anybody. So it made me just really want to get out and do something in my neighborhood. So we would do things like take garbage cans off the road for our neighbors, or if it was really windy, for some reason my neighborhood is windy, and we would notice garbage cans just laying in the road, so we'd pick them up and get them off the road. My grandbabies and I would go on walks with me, and we would take little grocery bags and pick up garbage while we were out and everything. So one day my neighbor comes out, and I'm standing in the yard, and he's like, I've noticed you've been doing all this stuff, you know, what's going on? And I was like, well, you know, I explained to him the whole neighboring concept, the study that we were doing as a church staff, and just thought that was the end of it. Well, 3 days later, he went out and was actually cutting the neighbor's grass across the street from us, and I just thought, oh, that is awesome. So when he got done, I walked over and intentionally just to give him praise and say, great job. And he was like, well, hey, you can't be the only good neighbor, right? So I just love the fact that it's even contagious, that you're out there doing things and you don't even know if people are noticing or not. But not only are they noticing, but, you know, they're kind of following suit too. It's contagious. So I love that.
Yeah,
so
that was a really awesome story that always reminded me just to be intentional in what we're doing in our neighborhoods.